Let's move out to the audience and your questions and thoughts, things that you want to know more about that have been occasioned by the conversation so far. On the aisle, stand up, tell us who you are.
Gone through a system already that didn't prepare them. So we are a generation out. We have a losing, I won't say it's a lost population, but it's a losing population. How do you really begin to turn this around? I understand you want to pay teachers more, I agree with that. But you also have to have teachers prepared better. And it seems to me that the universities are failing in that as well.
Well, you know, the Secretary made a speech a couple of weeks ago in which he said exactly that we had to, first of all, tackle the whole teacher preparation issue. Then we have to tackle how we reward, how we compensate, how we professionalize teaching, what John talked about. But, you know, I mean, Matt Goldstein wrote this about 6 years ago in a book called The Teaching Matters or The Teacher Challenge, I forget. There are two things we've got to do. They've got to get much, much more applied experience. They've got to get off of the campus and into the classroom where teaching and learning takes place. And Michelle can tell you from her own experience what it was like coming from Cornell and Harvard to a low-income community in Baltimore. And the second thing we've got to do is we've got to get them exposed much more rigorously to content. So if you don't know mathematics, it's very hard to teach mathematics. And teacher education programs focus on pedagogy, and it's not that pedagogy doesn't matter, but if you focus on that to the exclusion of understanding the kids, the population, the classroom management issues, and mastering the content, you won't succeed. So you have to start with the ed schools, but then you've got to attract people. So if I could get great math and science teachers, that would impact dramatically what happened in my schools. Everybody talks about how they ended up where they are. For me, it was a high school physics teacher. And that's what's lacking in this mix.
I think Joel is exactly right about this, and I think the difficult thing for the country is I don't see how you can prepare a math and science teacher in only 4 years, because you've got to know the content and you've got to have the real exposure in the classroom with mentors that help you learn how to do a different situation. One of the things we know from teacher studies is that all teachers, even the very best ones, struggle in their first few years. It's a tough situation they're put in, particularly in underprivileged schools. It's hard to get going. It's hard to get mastery of the classroom, and hard to really get kids to really learn and perform. So we need to support them better, and we need to educate them better.
Yes. Wait for the mic.
Good morning. My name is Chip Maggott. Thank you very much for an insightful panel. Putting aside the issues that all of you have addressed concerning how you need to improve the quality of teaching and the innovative programs each of you has put in place to do that, what is the role of technology to augment that? I'm not talking about replacing teachers in the classroom or anything that you've talked about so far, but last night someone made a comment that resonated with me. What about using interactive video, for example, so that you can have students in a classroom or classrooms all around the country real-time talking to a scientist in the Galapagos doing research or doing this and that, to take the truly best of the best at the university level or at the secondary school level and make that scalable, if you will, and bring it into the classrooms, not to supplant the teachers, but to augment it. Is there research on that? Is that something we're doing? Is that something we should be doing more of?
So I'm not aware of a tremendous amount of research around this, but for our perspective, there are a few obvious ways that can happen. First is when we talk about differentiation, one way that can happen in an active way in a classroom is when a teachers working with a small group of students, another group of students can be on computers, working at their skill level, at their individual skill level, to reinforce skills. So that is one thing. We also have developed a partnership with OCTO here, which is the Office of the Chief Technology Officer, and they're trying to boost up the amount of technology hardware that we have in a lot of our schools. But in one school in particular, they've put in place a tremendous amount of technology that allows our kids to go on virtual field trips. So the kids went to the Dinosaur Museum in Edmonton, Canada the other day, literally going on a tour through this virtual. And so the amount of exposure that our kids can potentially get through technology is tremendous.
The answer is so obvious, but what's amazing, I mean, it's so obviously yes. You know, technology influences all of our lives in dramatically different ways. Why wouldn't it influence the teaching and learning equation? And I could give you literally thousands of examples of how you could make that work. This Israeli company that has this thing called Time to Know, and they're doing exactly the kind of thing you're talking about. But let me say to you where we are. I have kids in New York who want to take advanced placement physics, right? But there's only 2 or 3 in the school that are ready for it. There are good online courses they could take. If they pass them, they get college credit, but they don't get high school credit because there's not a live teacher in the classroom. Now, I try to explain to people, if they can get college credit, it would make some sense that they should be able to get high school credit. So that's the gap. I only point that out to say the obvious answer to what you're talking about. It's going to take experimentation, it's going to take innovation. Not everything is going to work exactly right. But the best lectures on physics I ever listened to were by Richard Feynman. And I believe if my kids at Stuyvesant were listening to Richard Feynman lectures, that gentleman from Macaulay's Honors would feel differently.
Ma'am.
Hi, my name is Edith Caperton. Thank you for a great panel. So all of you in Washington, New York, and Stanford have already built for the last 2 decades maybe amazing models that work, that are innovative, that engage students, that do professional development for educators. Tell us a little bit about when do you make a decision to make a large investment in scaling that up? And do you have a model for scaling the good pockets of innovation?
Well, scaling for a university really means trying to assess what works. Stanford has a charter school in a low-income neighborhood near the university, and that really is a laboratory for us to try to understand what methods work. How do we educate teachers and prepare teachers to be better? Because I think, as has been alluded to here, we have a problem really not understanding how to prepare teachers. Some people are naturally good at it, but we could do a better job of training them. So it's a laboratory for that, a laboratory for understanding what mechanisms work, a laboratory for parent engagement. How do we get to parent engagement? How do we get to use of technology that really works well in the classroom? How do we get the students to become not only good critical thinkers, but real representatives of their community as well? And I think we try to think about that whole package and use that, publish it, study it, and then use that as an avenue to try to spread the word about what does work.
I think of it as a systems challenge and not as a magic bullet. So I think scaling is going to fundamentally depend on getting 3 aspects of the system right. We got to go toward portfolio management. There's so much. We've brought in over 400 or 500 new schools doing different things, but they're being operated by community groups, charter operators, some of them public, some of them, but we shouldn't be trying to figure out how to run 1,600 schools from central headquarters. None of us are smart enough. Second thing is we've got to get this human resource equation right. That's a systems challenge. Michelle is doing as much important work on that as anybody. And the third thing is to create an innovative environment in which you can bring private investment to help scale. Since the mayor took over, we've raised almost $400 million. It's been our R&D money, our venture money.
Sir.
Good morning. Justin Bibb with Gallup here in Washington, D.C. Teacher quality and teacher effectiveness seems to be the buzzword going around in education right now, particularly with the new innovative initiative with the Gates Foundation. Beyond just test scores, what are some of the innovative ways you guys are going to try to measure quality teachers in your respective school districts?
So I think it's interesting that you said besides test scores, because we actually across the country in public education don't use the test scores of children to determine whether or not teachers are effective. And that's, in my mind, one of the craziest things that you could have in place. It's fascinating because we are implementing here in DC a new teacher evaluation model whereby 50% of the teacher's evaluation is based on their value-added student achievement gains. And this right now, people are going nuts about it. In the public education sector, right? The teachers' unions and folks saying, "Oh my gosh, 50%." And then you talk to people in the business community, they say, "Well, why only 50%? Isn't that what they're supposed to be doing? Shouldn't we be measuring 90% of their evaluation being based on that?" So what I think, unfortunately, people in public education consider to be innovative are the things that people out in industry are doing as a matter of fact, and I think that's part of the problem. I'd say another thing that we are implementing that I've gotten a lot of good feedback on is we are having every teacher observed at least 5 times, most of those observations unannounced, by master educators who are coming in. They have no ties to the administration, no ties to the schools. They're content area and grade level experts who are coming in to do an evaluation of the classroom practices, and I think that's a very promising tool as well.
How do you set up that system, Joel Klein?
You do it the way Michelle did it. I mean, she brought in teachers, they worked with her, they designed it, they have a mix of factors, and I think, to go back to the last question, we need to make sure the tests are testing the skills that we need. And that's part of the challenge, why I talk about national standards and national testing, to make sure. But you know, when people look at global tests or people look at the NAEP tests, Michelle says 8%, that's a number that should trouble us. And she should hope to get her system where it was 92.8 the other way, just like I'd hope to get mine. So I think these are things, but we've got to work on multiple fronts. If the tests are not testing the relevant skills, then measuring value added is not going to be significant.
Final thoughts before we close this morning?
Well, let me just say, I think on a most optimistic note, I think what Arne Duncan and the President are doing on Race to the Top is the best national shot I have seen, because what they're saying to 50 states is, take a look at your whole card and see whether you're willing to do the tough and often disruptive things that are going to be necessary, starting with standards, moving to teacher effectiveness, getting rid of barriers to entries for charters, making sure that you measure, just like Michelle is measuring, we're now starting to measure for tenure decisions in New York, and put in place a host of intelligent policies. And if you do, you can get big bucks in the current economy. And if, in fact, they do this in a way that says to states there'll be a few winners and quite a few losers, that's not something you often see in federal policy. I think that has the best chance of driving real reform, because once that takes place for the few, the many will come along, and you will begin to build the kind of change. And I ask you to think about it for a second. It's almost never do you see federal policies in which dollars are not all distributed equally, like Title I in education. And what this President and Secretary Duncan are making a bet on is, if we're willing to create a race, some will win, but they will show us the way for the next generation.
So Rhee, I think that's exactly right. It took us a long time to get in this place. It's going to take us a while to get out. But we have to move forward. We have to measure, measure, measure. Better testing is certainly a key part of that. We could design tests that test critical thinking, reading skills better than we currently do, and we should move in that direction. And as we do that, then we can really measure which teachers are really doing well, and we can begin to pay them better. We can inspire more young people going into teaching. And I think once we get that started and get a competition among our schools, I mean, it's one of the things that really works in higher education. Berkeley and Stanford compete, and not only on the football field. They compete for the best students and the best faculty all the time. We need that kind of competition. And if we can get that drive started in the US, I think we can improve all our school systems.
You know, I was at a conference of CEOs about 2 weeks ago, and I was being interviewed, and the interviewer said to me, you know, you have been criticized for your lack of collaboration and cooperation in running the school district. And I looked out in the audience and I said, how many of you CEOs run your companies by committee and cooperation? None. I said, so why is the standard any different for how we run a school district. We can't have different standards for what an effective organization looks like within the public sector, and specifically the public education sector, than we do anywhere else. We have to have accountability. That's first and foremost. If people are not performing, it doesn't matter how well-meaning you are, how many years you've worked. If you're not producing results for kids, you've got to go. And it's not until we have that mindset of accountability within public education that we're going to be able to see the sea change that's necessary.
And as it happens, the NewsHour is one of those few places in American broadcasting where you can see serious, long-form, longitudinal coverage of education, and probably go to some parts of the country where Michelle Rhee is known as the NewsHour's Michelle Rhee, because we've spent a lot of time covering her attempts to improve things in the DC public schools. Please thank our panelists.
Rhee, thank you. Thank you.